glad you're here. Imagine a life that begins before anyone knows its importance. Imagine a newborn child who has no idea that one day he will reshape how the entire world communicates, creates, works, and dreams. Imagine a boy placed in the hands of fate, unaware that he is destined to become one of the most influential figures of the modern age. This is not fiction. This is the beginning of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was born on February 24th, 1955, in San Francisco, California. His biological parents, Joanne Schiebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali, were young, overwhelmed, and unable to raise him together. So only days after his birth, he was given up for adoption. He was taken in by a warm, humble couple, Paul and Clara Jobs. They were not wealthy. They were not educated in elite universities, but they offered something far more powerful: a home, a sense of belonging, and a love that would shape Steve's soul. Paul Jobs, Steve's adoptive father, worked with his hands, a mechanic, a craftsman, a man who believed that if something existed in the world, he could take it apart and understand it. In their small garage, surrounded by the smell of metal and motor oil, Paul built a workbench for his son, a place for exploration, curiosity, and discovery. Steve loved watching his father. He admired the way Paul treated every object with care, even the parts no one else would ever see. And his father told him something that stayed with him forever. If you're going to build something, build it well. Even the back of the cabinet should look beautiful. Those words became one of the deepest pillars of Steve Jobs' philosophy. But Steve was not an easy child in school. He was brilliant, too brilliant, in fact, for the slow pace of the classroom. He got bored. He disrupted lessons. He played pranks. He got suspended more than once. Yet one teacher saw what others didn't. She recognized his talent and challenged him in ways no one else had. Still, Steve struggled to fit in. At 12 years old, bullied and unhappy, he told his parents, "If you don't move me out of this school, I'm not going back." And so, with all their savings, his parents bought a small house in Los Altos. They didn't know it then, but this simple house, with its garage, would one day become a historic landmark, the birthplace of Apple. At 13, Steve got his first real break. He called Bill Hewlett, co-founder of Hewlett-Packard, to ask for parts for a project. Impressed by the courage of a teenager, Hewlett gave him the parts and a summer job. Around this time, Steve met someone who would change the course of his life forever: Steve Wozniak. Wozniak was a quiet genius, a natural-born engineer who could build anything. Steve Jobs was different. He saw possibilities, markets, stories, products that didn't yet exist. Together, they made a powerful duo. Their first small venture was something called a blue box, a device that allowed free long-distance calls. It wasn't legal, but it taught them something transformative. When technical brilliance meets the courage to dream big, extraordinary things happen. Steve later said, "If it weren't for the blue boxes, there would have been no Apple." After high school, Steve went to Reed College. It was expensive, too expensive, but he chose it anyway because something inside him felt drawn to its freedom and creativity. He soon dropped out, not because he wanted to stop learning, but because he wanted to learn only what mattered to him. He slept on the floors of friends' dorm rooms. He collected Coke bottles for food money. He walked across town once a week to get a free meal at a Hare Krishna temple. He also wandered into a calligraphy class, a class that had nothing to do with engineering or computers. Years later, he said, "Without that class, the Mac would never have had beautiful typography." This is the magic of Steve Jobs. He connected worlds that never spoke to each other: art and engineering, philosophy and business, simplicity and technology. In 1974, Jobs traveled to India seeking spiritual meaning. He returned transformed, thinner, calmer, more introspective, influenced by Zen Buddhism, meditation, and the search for inner clarity. This spiritual journey shaped the way he later built products: simple, focused, centered, essential. Then came 1976, the year everything changed. In a small bedroom, and later in a modest garage, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne founded Apple Computer. Wozniak built the Apple I. Steve sold his old van to fund it. Wozniak sold his HP calculator. And from those sacrifices began one of the greatest stories in business history. Apple II soon followed, a colorful, user-friendly machine that shocked the industry. By the age of 23, Steve Jobs was a millionaire. But money was never the point. What mattered to him was the mission: to make technology personal, elegant, and approachable. Yet success always comes with storms. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh. It was beautiful, revolutionary, and packed with ideas far ahead of its time. The famous 1984 commercial promised the dawn of a new era. But internally, Apple was divided. The Macintosh did not initially sell as hoped. Tensions grew between Jobs and CEO John Sculley. And then, the unthinkable happened. Steve Jobs was fired from the company he created. He was devastated. He was humiliated. He was lost. But years later, he would say, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have happened to me." Because sometimes life pushes you right into your greatest opportunities. After leaving Apple, Steve founded NeXT, a company that built advanced computers for education and research. They were too expensive to succeed commercially, but technologically, they were brilliant. Then he bought a small animation studio from George Lucas. It was struggling, losing money, and considered a risky bet. He renamed it Pixar. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated film in history. It became a global sensation, and Pixar became the greatest animation studio of the modern era. Steve Jobs, again, reinvented an entire industry. While Steve was conquering Hollywood, Apple was falling apart. The company was near bankruptcy, directionless, and desperate. In a dramatic twist, Apple bought NeXT in 1997. And with that deal, Steve Jobs returned to the company that had once pushed him away. He returned not as a broken man, but as a visionary reborn. When he came back, Apple was producing too many products with no clear purpose. Steve slashed everything and introduced a single philosophy: focus, simplicity, excellence. And soon, the world witnessed Apple's rebirth. In 1998 came the iMac, playful, colorful, alive. Then came the iPod in 2001, 1,000 songs in your pocket. Then iTunes, then the iTunes Store, then the iPod Mini, Nano, Shuffle. Then, on January 9th, 2007, Steve walked on stage in San Francisco and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." And the world changed. The iPhone didn't just redefine a device, it redefined human behavior itself. Touchscreens, apps, mobile internet, everything began there. In 2010, he introduced the iPad, bringing the future even closer. It felt as if Steve Jobs was bending reality, pulling tomorrow into today. But behind all the applause and bright lights, a quiet battle was taking place inside his body. In 2003, Steve was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He fought it. He hid his pain. He returned to work again and again. He appeared on stage thinner every year, but his voice, his passion, never broke. In August 2011, he stepped down as CEO, saying, "I have always said that if there came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as CEO of Apple, I would be the first to let you know." Unfortunately, that day has come. 6 weeks later, on October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at home, surrounded by his family. His final words were simple, soft, and filled with wonder. "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." But the story does not end there, because legacies don't die. Ideas don't die. Influence doesn't die. Steve Jobs left behind something greater than products. He left behind a way of thinking, a belief that technology can be beautiful, innovation can be human, and one person with enough passion can change the world. He taught the world to embrace simplicity, to chase excellence relentlessly, to trust intuition, to follow curiosity, to build things that matter, things that touch people's lives. This was Steve Jobs, a man who was imperfect, intense, demanding, but also a man who refused to accept limits. A man who believed deeply that life is too short to live someone else's dream. He once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." And he did. More than anyone of his generation, he truly did. And so, the story of Steve Jobs is not just the story of a businessman. It is the story of a rebel, a dreamer, a creator, a seeker, who looked at the world not as it was, but as it could be. A story of a man who connected technology with humanity and left behind a world forever changed. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to share it with someone who might like it too.